Um, Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start promptly in the next 2 minutes. We're just waiting for one of our panelists to join us, and we'll soon start. Thank you very much. We're going to start in the next 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us in this very busy morning. And I hope not all of you are stuck outside. It's been a hot test outside with protesting and lane block. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We're here on our side event as the Presidential Climate Commission, really looking into leveraging climate finance flows in a changing geopolitical world. I mean, those of us who are watching the RAND performance, we're also seeing some of the potential opportunities that are coming with either the geopolitical tensions or the developments around the geopolitical space. Without any further ado, I mean, this is our second iteration of the report. And I wanted to just invite Christelle Beas on stage to really come and take us through the journey around getting to this product. She will also just give us a snippet of how the numbers are looking as far as the climate finance flows are concerned in South Africa. Ms. Christelle Beas is the Senior Technical Advisor on Climate Finance at the Presidential Climate Commission Secretariat. Ms. Christelle, please join us. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Dumisani, thank you for the introduction. It is truly a highlight to do the second launch of the Climate Finance Landscape Report for South Africa here at COP30 in Belém. We launched the document on the 24th of October in South Africa, so I think it still counts as relatively hot off the press, and we welcome you to this event. The Barco to Belém roadmap aims to significantly expand climate finance support for developing countries and specifically increase the impact of public resources to attract much larger sums of private investment to climate solutions. This and other finance initiatives and pledges that are underway at this conference as we speak place a very strong responsibility on us to map climate finance flows, specifically to understand the interlocking data sets around climate finance at a country level, at a regional level, and ultimately at a global level. We use these data sets to track progress, to understand the gaps in terms of NDC targets, to set priorities, and to make sure that we direct climate finance to where action is needed for a just and inclusive transition. The Presidential Climate Commission has been spearheading progressive climate finance tracking as part of its evidence-based research processes that now cover 5 years of finance flows in South Africa. So this is the first time that for 5 years we fully understand what the climate finance landscape in South Africa looks like. So the report that we are launching today systematically progressed from 2019. The PCC partnered with the French Development Agency, AFD, to develop the South African Climate Finance Landscape Report for 2023, and then this report that we are launching again here today for 2025. The aim of the work remains the same. It's to provide an empirical baseline against which to measure progress towards levels of investment that is consistent with climate change goals and now the Climate Change Act of 2024 of South Africa. In addition to the data that you will see in the report also captures the comprehensive research and partnership creation within the capital markets of South Africa that provide timeliness and current market intelligence. So when the PCC envisioned this work and we started out, we explored how to address barriers to capital flowing to the needs of the just transition. And we considered some of the following questions. Is South Africa optimally accessing international climate finance commitments and efficiently engaging the domestic and global finance architecture? In addition, what is the potential for South Africa's domestic and capital markets to be providers of just transition finance? Lastly, we wanted to ensure that we position the work as a decision-making facility in the financial sector that is supported by rigorous evidence-based research that is compatible with the country's climate policy objectives. So in the report of 2023 and 2025 especially, you'll see some exciting new additions. And this is where we started aligning the tracking of the climate finance flows with the National Treasury Green Taxonomy. We started looking at developing tags for climate finance or for the just transition, and that's really exciting. And also starting to the first movements to track guarantee and other risk mitigating measures in the market. And you will hear more from our esteemed panel on how these play out at the global level as it stems from this report. So these questions and many more will be debated in the panel session. And as I said, the report is available on the PCC website. So this is the image that we all came to see and that we wanted to see for 2025. And I'm happy to give you just a short overview of the 2025 report for South Africa. So this is called the famous Sankey diagram. And as you can see, it also looks like the spaghetti diagram, sometimes referred to as that. And this provides the baseline of understanding where we need to go once we understand what the current landscape is. So South Africa is mobilizing record levels of climate finance, but the investment gap remains very wide. Annual climate investment reached 188.3 billion between 2022 and 2023. And you can see a fairly even split. This was driven by both domestic and international resources. This is the result, or the increase in quantum from the 23 report is about 50 billion South African rand. And this is a result of many dynamics in the market. One would be that as a biannual report, every second year, we refine the data methodology, and we've partnered with CPI in this regard, and we expand the reach of the data collection process. We've also factored in other and broader data systems and databases internationally, globally. So there's a mixed interconnected bag of reasons for the increase in the quantum. So achieving the 2030 and 2050 climate goals will require 2 to 3 times more finance than what is reflected here. So it shows a shortfall of around 200 to 400 billion. And the data highlights, among others, the urgent need to unlock private and concessional finance and to strengthen the country's just transition. So you'll also note in the document that where we where we show the actual impact of what the finance was used for, there's a description in the report on what the impact in that sector would be and how that could lead to facilitating the just transition in South Africa. So please do look at that. So making data accessible and actionable across the world in standardized and harmonized data sets like this allows for the reimagination and reconfiguration of the climate finance landscape for just transition action. In this context, mapping and understanding South Africa's climate finance flows and sharing this knowledge on a global stage is a critical value addition for South Africa and for the global community. So we are very proud to herewith then launch the Climate Finance Landscape Report of 2025 at COP30. And thank you very much for being here. Do me over to you to go into the panel session.
Thank you very much, Christelle. And yeah, we're gonna now move quickly, swiftly. You cannot hear me. Can you hear me fine? Can we just get? Is this better? Okay. Can you all hear me still? Thank you very much, Audrey. We're going to quickly move now to our panel discussion, and we're going to welcome our Deputy Chair of the Presidential Climate Commission, Dr. Crispian Olver. We're gonna welcome Audrey Rochkov, the Director for Climate Finance at the AFD. We're going to welcome next Mr. Olympus Mantata, the Head of Climate Finance and Environment Finance at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. We're also going to welcome, last but not least, Jody Enwong from the London School of Economics. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'm going to start to my left with you, Jody. I think there's a bit of a sound. There's a sound problem.
Yeah, there's a bit of interference in the sound that we hear. Yeah.
Yeah, still scratching.
Check, check. Is it better?
You, is this test, test?
Yeah, maybe we try and move along while the colleagues fix the sound. Once again, apologies for the inconvenience, ladies and gentlemen. Let me quickly move to my immediate left with Jody. I mean, from an academic perspective, we've seen quite some developments, around climate finance, but we wanted to understand much better. More specifically, how can green bonds and sustainably linked instruments, and blended finance partnerships together with the DFIs be scaled effectively?
Thank you so much for that question. I think we're definitely seeing labeled bonds being on the rise now, and I want to bring it to, I think, one point of regarding scaling it up. I think a really important thing that is also coming up alongside labeled bonds is taxonomies and the importance of providing clear definitions and clarifications and credibility to certain projects in order for us to understand what is green, what is not, what is transition, etc. So that's really important. And from what we've done in our bonds work, learning from governments, is that through the issuance of labeled bonds, We're also seeing the better interministerial coordination between the Ministry of Finance and other line ministries. And that's something that we've been really wanting to see, is to see Ministry of Finance and other ministries working hand in glove to develop transition projects that are backed by finance. So those are kind of two things that I feel like are quite positive in terms of further development for labeled bonds and blended finance as well. But it's hard to talk about green bonds or blended finance without kind of acknowledging the structural realities of what a lot of countries are in. Like, instruments are fitting within a wider landscape of financial system that is still right now struggling to deliver at the scale and the speed that it needs. So we do also need to fix the fundamentals around the financial system in order for these instruments to scale up better. And that includes, building stronger project pipelines, but also delivering the institutional capacity in order to facilitate this process from project preparation to early stage structuring. And also take seriously some of the critiques that we're seeing around blended finance and around green bond as well. There are questions that's being raised about, is focusing on the leverage ratio is enough, and should we focus more on the mission of the money that's being channeled? What is the bigger project that's there? I think Mariana Mazzucato's paper, I think, around blended finance is quite an enlightening piece for us to kind of ponder over some of the existing challenges for blended finance. And the last thing, I think, also the debates around the issuance in foreign currency and local currency and what that means, especially for sovereign issuance. Issuing in dollar versus local currency can increase risk of debt distress, especially in very volatile macroeconomic markets. And issuing local currency also give a bit more kind of the sovereign space and the policy space for the issuing countries as well. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jody. I mean, we're hearing green taxonomy, we're hearing, the cost of capital, especially for developing nations. But let me turn to, one of our international DFIs, the AFD, and hear from you, Audrey. I mean, you're hearing the cost of capital amongst others, and really the transition-backed or the transition finance-backed projects that are coming out from the London School of Economics. In your view, how can the international partners better coordinate to ensure that finance flows reach the most vulnerable communities? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to discuss with our dear South African friends. You are talking about coordination among international partners. I'm not sure it's our role to coordinate ourselves. It would be way better to be coordinated by a national partner. And this is the sense of our support to the creation of country platforms. We are expecting to be coordinated, guided by national priorities. So this is my first point. With regard to reaching the most vulnerable communities, from AFD, we have chosen to start from locally produced knowledge. This includes actually the climate finance landscape, but many other works also on inequalities, on energy poverty, and so on. We have worked with many partners in the University of Cape Town, WITS, and so on, to inform the decision, to create the knowledge, to know how to coordinate with South African partners to better use our funds and to better reach the most vulnerable people. From AFD, we have progressively chosen to focus our support on the just dimensions of the transition. So we have provided several support, like the JET Municipal Council with SALGA to contribute to the reform of energy pricing in coordination with the National Treasury. We have also worked with the Ministry of Higher Education on the JET Skills Desk. All of it was meant to invest in human capital. we are focusing our work on the transformative effect of the finance, and we really understood that in the South African context, it was the best investment we could do, to invest in human capital in the way that it has the potential to really transform the economy way more than a standalone project. So this is how we envisage our investment in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. Crispian, we are hearing from the AFD that they don't have the role in coordinating us, you know. They're giving us the blank check to really sign our own amount and do our own coordination in terms of getting the finance flows into the country. Given South Africa's historic landmark JETP coming from Glasgow, the 8.5 declaration, you know, we've had a lot of critiques back home. We're starting to hear some of the critics from the international community as well. And really within the country platforms that are now emerging, you know, as the favored model, what is your view on their availability to correct this course of coordination, of country ownership, as well as a guaranteed equitable benefits model?
Thank you, Dumasan. Hello, hello. Hello, there we go. Thank you. So, I mean, let me start by just saying, of all of the development partners we have worked with over the course of the JETP and implementing the just transition, AFD has been exemplary. So it's been a pleasure to work with you. You're acutely sensitive to local context. You seek to empower countries to lead their own transitions. And you don't tell us what to do, which we really appreciate. AFD's been obviously a key backer of this report, which, you know, amongst the many things they do, I think has been very significant. Just quickly on the issue of just transitions and how we get money into just transition projects. It's probably the hardest nut to crack of the whole climate finance terrain. And it starts with the problem of tracking. So justice and just transitions are not included in your traditional green taxonomies. So taxonomies, you know, map out very carefully mitigation and adaptation components, but the justice part of that, which is about investing in job creation and economic diversification and skills development and social support, gets left out of the metrics. So we've started the process with this report to try and track just transition elements. I don't think we've got it right. It's a set of quite complex methodological issues. But longer term, we want to see justice incorporated into green taxonomies, and we want to see systematic tracking. I mean, not just for ourselves, but very importantly for us, we want to be able to benchmark with other countries, benchmark with our peers. So we'd like to see it tracked across all transitions. In terms of actually mobilizing the finance, I mean, the perception out there, and to some extent it's I mean, there's some elements of the perception that are correct, but in aggregate, investors and banks, even the development banks, look at just transition as not bankable. And because it's typically smaller community-driven projects, these are ticket sizes that just don't, you know, for large development banks, the small ticket size, they just can't get their heads around it. It's too transactionally intensive to get into it. So we're launching a major experiment, which is done in partnership with my friend Olympus on my left. I think you're gonna talk about it now. I hope he's going to ask you this question because there are complexities there that I don't completely understand. But at 3:30 this afternoon, this is a little bit of an advert. In the IDFC Pavilion, we are launching the Just Transition Financing Mechanism. And I really want to encourage all of you to come. So, just to restate, these are bottom-up, largely community-driven development projects which are focusing on thorny issues around how do you diversify local economies, how do you build small and medium-scale enterprises, which are the big job creators, what other kinds of job creation activities linked to transitions can we engender? How do you build the workforce of tomorrow? So how do you invest in the skills that need to go into this broad transition? And what kind of social security can we provide, including things like income support, etc.? And these may seem on the face of it like areas without revenue streams. But for instance, on the skills side, we have a national skills levy, which is a payroll tax, which creates a steady revenue stream into our national skills fund, and which unfortunately is very inefficiently spent through our system of sector education and training authorities, which does need major reform. We're busy looking at that long and hard, including through the skills desk that Audrey spoke about. So the mechanism we're launching with the DBSA is basically blending finance. It's taking a chunk of grant and concessional money, leveraging it up with other resources that the DBSA has and which the private sector can put into it, and then channeling it into these so-called unbankable projects. And we'll be investing a lot of time in project preparation, helping communities and project developers get it to the point. I mean, I accept there's going to be a chunk of concessional money that has to carry them over the line, but the trick is how to co-design with them, with local communities, projects that are sustainable and viable into the long term. So that's what sorry, that was a long-winded reply to your question, but that's what we're trying to do.
It seems, and it would have been difficult to stop you on those tracks. So thank you very much, Dr. Oliver. I think that's a useful, start of the conversation in terms of the model, and hopefully it also improves Jodi's point around, tracking and actually tagging these projects so that they are transition projects that are actually bankable, that I also have some finance coming around them. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Olympus Mantata. You're not hearing me. You can hear me. Oh, sorry for that. The volume keeps going up and down. I don't know if the technical team can assist us with that. Yeah, but let me turn to you, Olympus. What insights can we draw from the efforts to crowd in private sector investments at scale, in investments within a country, or just maybe an example within the region, noting that you're working in the region, and what will drive this increased mobilization of climate finance for these regions?
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. I've been struggling myself to hear what Divisan is saying. Yeah, but maybe just a bit about the DBSA and who we are. We are a government-owned development finance institution, mainly in the infrastructure space, both within South Africa and beyond, basically mandate covering the continent. But I wanted to talk more about the work that we have been doing, especially with regard to mobilizing finance from, in the main, your UN-based, UN convention-based financing mechanism, mobilizing that concessional financing and trying to use that to crowd in a private investment. So we've really been toying around with a few of these mechanisms, and I thought I would talk to one, hopefully in the limited time that I have. But earlier on, we recognize the importance of trying to pull in the main commercial banks into financing climate projects, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. But the start for us was really trying to understand what are the barriers that commercial banks are facing. And so we started right from scratch, with a roadshow of all major commercial banks in the country, trying to understand what is it that they are dealing with, the kind of pipelines that they have in place, the barriers that they are facing. And we use that learning to really develop a facility that we call a climate financing facility. Then from there, we successfully managed to get it capitalized by, the GCF with co-financing from the DBSA. We were quite proud of the product that we produced, as one of the first green bank-based model of financing, up till we started implementation. And these are the lessons that we learned when we went into implementation. As much as we had consulted when we developed the model, we realized that some of the terms that we got agreed to by the GCF, when we went down to implementation, they were difficult to implement. First of all, you would find that very basic standard terms, let's say, for example, I'm not sure if you can still hear me because I can't hear myself. Okay. Yeah. So you find even common standard terms like commitment fees and the level at which that could be executed. You find that the expectation from the Green Climate Fund versus the market are quite, apart. So you're starting right there to get stuck. But the big issue for us was currency issues, forex issues. Because as you know, we're receiving the funds in dollars and trying to deploy in local currency. Obviously, the beneficiaries were not ready to take up the risk in terms of the currency risk that comes up with the funds that we have in place. Initially, what we had in mind was that we would receive the dollars, use our internal treasury for hedging purposes, and then pass on to clients. But the structure that we could only agree with the GCF was that there was a bit of discomfort of having money go directly onto our balance sheet. The preference was that money should go through, a trust types of structure. But the problem is, for as long as the money was not touching our balance sheet, we could not hedge, which means we are only left with the option of passing on the risk to clients. And that just did not work. We got stuck with the facility for over 2 years, not able to deploy the funds. Ultimately, we found a solution in the form of a credit line where the money was coming direct to us and we could be able to hedge. And then we could start deploying the funds. So it is quite critical to realize that the issue is not just about mobilizing the funds. you have to be very careful around whether the funds are deployable. I mean, we talk about climate as an emergency, but the funds that we get have got so many conditions that you cannot be able to deploy with speed, therefore negating the very agency that you're talking about. So that was an important, learning from our side. But the other thing that I can talk to quickly is that typically with private sector, there's also a bit of hesitation around the obligations that comes with this financing. What type of reporting obligations are you bringing, and how does it fit into their normal reporting, uh, you know, uh, you know, systems and processes? So we found that the DBSA, like for example, we would have to come in through our own resources and assist with regard to those type of obligations for private sector to be able to take up the financing. So it is quite important to really understand that it's not really just about mobilization. It's about the ability to mobilize and then be able to pass it on, because it is structured in a way that it can be acceptable for private sector to come in. Let me stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thanks, Audrey. I think you're getting the hang of this. Thank you very much, Olympus. And I think you've partially answered what I would have asked you as the second question. So you've saved yourself a bit of time, but we'll still want to hear from you some more. I mean, as your parting shots on the question side from me before the audience, let me come back to you, Jody. I mean, you've had a bit of emphasis also around the forex hedging and the forex risk issues from Olympus, but you also had a little bit about the pain points, especially reporting. Could you elaborate on the persistent underreporting of adaptation finance and the challenges around tagging or green taxonomies in the space of just transition classification?
It's a big question. I think there are some similarities between adaptation finance and just transition finance in comparison to mitigation-based finance. I think when we're talking about adaptation and just transition, we're talking about this very bigger system level change that we're trying to see. And so it becomes really difficult because the boundaries are often blurred and the definitions are often not clear. And the definitions sometimes shouldn't be so clear because they're so context specific. So I think that can lead to kind of the misunderstanding or the different interpretations of what justice means or what adaptation or resilience means in a specific context can lead to it being interpreted differently in reporting frameworks in different tagging processes, which then can lead to underreporting in that sense. I think underreporting can be different ways: underreporting of the demand and underreporting of the supply of the financing. Right. I think with adaptation finance as well, sometimes it can be embedded under other type of financing that may not be tagged as adaptation finance, but definitely play a role towards adaptation. We're thinking about kind of road, water, coastal infrastructure development. They might not be tagged as such, but they serve that purpose ultimately. And also the interlinkage between adaptation and just transition, right? I often hear that if you do adaptation right, that is a form of just transition. So in a way, it would be very difficult to tag those two kind of type of financing as well. Similarly, the role of the private sector in both type of financing is still quite nebulous, and I think it's quite contentious what role private sector should play in adaptation finance, what role private sector should play in just transition finance, and that needs to become more visible as well, like also what Dr. Over said about the less bankability of some of these projects. And what I will quickly touch on about taxonomies as well, I think it has been quite mitigation dominant as well. So it's really hard to capture the ecosystem level type of adaptation or the social transformation element of just transition in a singular metric. We in our work, whether that's kind of national finance taxonomy or corporate metrics that we're working on, it can be quite a reductive exercise, and it's kind of an existential crisis for us when we're doing research on kind of what exactly then is the story that you're trying to tell with this singular qualitative or quantitative measurement. also think taking into account the context specificity as well that I mentioned for just transition and for adaptation. I think lastly, because this type of financing is not kind of fitting the risk return appetite for a lot of private investors, it's less just transition and adaptation finance is not only just a technical issue, but also a political issue as well. It's an issue of political will. And we're seeing kind of the bastardization and the polarization around just transition as a topic in many places around the world. In Canada, the wholesale retrenchment of the carbon price is kind of, in a way, a huge violation on the just transition because so much of the funding was being rebated into just transition programming. So in that sense, I think we need to kind of keep the political will under adaptation and just transition finance as well in order for it to be scaled up.
Thank you very much, Jody. Very, very useful points. I mean, we're hearing, Audrey, that the taxonomies are largely mitigation dominant. And I'm wondering if I could check whether the recent report that you've released in the Presidential Climate Commission, does it really give you some compass in terms of targeting catalytic and high impact, climate investments? Does it help you think through your investments and how you allocate your balance sheet? Thank you.
Thank you again, Dumisani. I think this type of report does not only help us track the finance, because it's not an end in itself to track. It has to be useful for planning. So the question is really planning. A transition, a successful transition is a transition that has been planned well in advance. And that's why it takes time. And that's why you talked about critics at the very beginning. But people have to understand that it takes a lot of time to first track and then plan. And we need to plan to work on the upskilling, creating economic diversification, and so on. So once everything is planned, we can talk about investments and we know where and when to invest. So this is the first point. So in this sense, this landscape provides a compass to know how to plan. But your question is also about high impact climate investment. I'm not sure a high impact climate investment is the one that reduce the most the CO2 emissions. We are really talking about transition. So we often had a discussion around climate finance versus transition finance. And I think probably the high impact climate investment is the one that is close to a transition investment that takes into account all the dimensions of transition, not only CO2 reduction, but also the investment in human capital that we talked about. So from AFD, we have released a new strategy for nature. And we have decided to not only take into account the social dimensions into every transition, but we also committed to allocate 50% of our climate finance into the transformation. So we are trying to define what is a transformation, transitional finance or transformative finance, and then 50% of our climate finance should be qualified as transformative. So it's not only a question of volume, it's also a question of quality. And this is really important since we are talking about climate finance really becoming the new development finance. All the climate finance is development finance, and we need to have all the development finance that is climate finance. So this is a new challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. when and how we take that and we take it to the next question. A brief one, Crispian, really. When and how do we increase, or what measures, policy measures, policy instruments, as well as, platforms that we could think about in terms of effectively catalyzing a significant increase to our proportion of adaptation climate finance? How do we get the 50% from AFD into adaptation?
So, yeah, I mean, I was talking about the difficulties of just transition finance, and adaptation finance comes a close second in terms of difficulty and perception, particularly perceptions around lack of bankability. But that's a little bit of it's not entirely true that the adaptation sector is unbankable. Because if you think of the big adaptation sectors, so water resilience, water infrastructure, upstream dams, large irrigation works, municipal distribution systems, fixing leaks in municipalities. All of these are, water infrastructure which is funded against the revenue streams from tariffs that are levied on households. I know that the poor struggle to pay for basic water access. So, many tariff systems, including in our municipalities, have a cross-subsidization mechanism so that poor households get access to at least a minimum level of basic services. Similarly, if you look at food security and agriculture, I mean, by far the largest proportion of food produced in our country comes from commercial agriculture. And the commercial agriculture sector is largely bankable. I mean, it faces its own risks. So there are most farmers can survive one crop failure. If there are 2 years of crop failures, many of them go under. And if it's, a 3-year drought and 3 years of crop failure, the large proportion of them go bankrupt. So there's a big challenge in the agriculture sector of how you insure farmers over that period. And, we're looking very closely at instruments around parametric insurance. So farmers don't have to prove that they're bankrupt. They simply get triggered, prolonged heat waves and drought beyond a certain period trigger a set of payments to those farmers. But we've been working very closely with Agri-SA on instruments that will certainly help the commercial sector, but also the smaller scale farmers navigate this period that we're going through. Similarly, much of the urban infrastructure, even roads and stormwater drainage, gets funded out of the municipal rates base. So there's a system of property taxes and levies that fund these areas that don't have immediate, like water and electricity, where their tariffs are one set of infrastructure, and then there's all the other local government infrastructure that you don't get a direct service charge for. Most of this is funded out of the municipal property rates base. We do have a system of intergovernmental grants that subsidizes municipalities' capital and operating costs. So it goes on. So if you look at the different adaptation sectors, even, ecosystem services and payment for ecosystem services and a lot of the biodiversity components, they're revenue streams that you can work with. So we need to guard against reinforcing a narrative that adaptation is not fundable. It is more hard. You need more creative mechanisms. And it's partly why what South Africa is now looking, everyone knows about our JETP. We are now working actively on an adaptation and resilience investment platform. So that will be, there was already, you'll hear a little bit about it at this country platform event on Saturday. Chloe Romaro is going to mention that South Africa's working on this platform. It's not a launch. We're not ready to launch. But we will be signaling that. And our president has already announced the creation of a climate change response fund, which is going to be the key funding mechanism into that platform.
Thank you very much, Crispian. Indeed, tools and systems and policy levers that we can really tap into to really flow and redirect financing into adaptation. Mr. Mantata, just briefly, I mean, we've heard the progress around the work that you've done in terms of understanding the commercial banks environment and how you could, really assist that development space. But despite all of that, concessional finance still remains a pain point, currently sitting at below 15% of total flows. How can this be increased to address the key funding gaps? I mean, just briefly.
Thank you very much. I would want to approach it this way. I think it's always important to keep agitating for more funds to be made available, especially concessional funds. But I think our case will be a little stronger where we are able to show quick utilization of available funds. And that is where the question of, a lot of effort being put into preparation, especially for development of robust pipeline of project, is quite key. And I think sometimes when you talk about project preparation, it sounds a lot more than we're just looking at how to package project. But there's also the important part of what I think Crispian referred to in terms of how to design and structure projects and structure instruments that are able to look at the limitations and how to overcome them and move beyond business as usual and be able to overcome those barriers. I mean, we at the DBSA has been recently looking at how to use especially outcome-based facilities to try to overcome the challenges, especially around adaptation financing. And it's amazing that when you sit and try to design based on overcoming a barrier, how much solutions you can be able to come up with, how many innovative solutions you can start to explore that bring you to the desired outcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much to my panel. We've had the research, we've had the funding that's available and that we need to coordinate ourselves. We've had the policy and the technical instruments that are available. We're also hearing the financial engineering and innovation that's happening at the TBSA around financing. Can I just check from the audience if you'd want to just hear more about a specific element of the discussants' inputs? Any questions? We have one over there.
Hi, good afternoon, or morning yet. My question is around the comment of, I like this idea of grouping small community initiatives and making them more attractive for investment. But my question is around that comment about, you're talking about just transition initiatives not being bankable. And I think there's a danger around that because I think that narrative is just because we're thinking of returns on investments in a traditional way. And has there been any thought on like outcome-based results, but not for adaptation or mitigation, but specifically for just transition outcomes? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Manav, and I have a question regarding based on my past work experience. I used to work with the Green Climate Fund, and now I work with the Southern Transition. So on Just Transition, you might know our organization. So I wanted to understand, like, when it comes to the climate finance, when you talk about like the challenges that the conditionality that there is, I know, like, when I was there, it used to take like a 5 to 7 years to get accreditation from the UNFCCC, and then, oh, sorry, from GCF. And then you talk about, like, we have an emergency like in front of us, but it cannot be emergency when the finance is coming in, like, at least like taking 10 years to arrive. So when we look at the just transition, what are the new challenges? Like, what are the challenges that you are envisioning that, let's say, we can, somehow we can mobilize finance and we can make things move faster? So that's what I'm trying to understand, like how, we can make it happen, like, understanding the difficulty around with the financial mobilizing and the ecosystem around. So wanted to understand your thought, like, are you envisioning like some sort of challenges that we need to be prepared moving ahead, considering the ecosystem around the climate finance space? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me give the first one to Olympus and ask Audrey to close us off with the second one. Thank you. Briefly, just 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I think on the positive side, my observation working with the GCF is that the feedback that has been going back to them seem to be bearing some fruits in some areas. You talked about how long accreditation takes. I know they're currently looking at revising that, looking at a more project-based accreditation model, which should allow countries and organizations to be able to access finance with speed. But I think that's part of the problem. You would know that there are many accredited entities who are not able to access finance even post-accreditation. So there's many other things to sort out. The last thing to mention quickly, I talked about Forex issues that we faced. The learnings from that and the many years of pain that we experienced yielded some positive results, in the sense that when we got, like a water reuse project approved, in actual fact, the GCF agreed to take up Forex risk. Of course, not directly. I don't have time to explain on how that is being done, but there is positives in the sense that the pain that we have had seems to be yielding some positive fruits, and hopefully we'll start to deploy with speed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. But thanks to Olympus for answering both questions around conditionality, but also attempting to answer the project pipeline on the just transition. We do have 1 minute, and I would like to invite our deputy chair to just close us off quickly with the 1 minute remaining. Crispian Olva, you have the floor.
Well, just to say thank you for joining us. I mean, these questions of finance are really fundamental to getting a successful transition. The report that we launched today gives us a yardstick. And what's really, I mean, we're in a very unique position, having this really being our third report in a row. So we're now starting to build a longitudinal study. We can't claim that, we have succeeded yet. The aggregate flows are still too short of the total. There's still this way too big an emphasis on mitigation. Adaptation, we still need to ramp up very considerably. We're still getting the just transition tracking into the system. But, this has laid the foundation for us to think very strategically about our approach to mobilizing climate finance. So thank you all for coming. Great to see you.